Rachel Montgomery knew how to look perfect. This was not just a habit, but her weapon. She got up at 6 in the morning, went for a run, then took a contrast shower, had breakfast with black coffee and fresh berries, and then impeccably styled her hair, creating the image of that very ideal wife that every man dreams of. Each of her mornings was thought out to the smallest detail, not a single extra minute, not a single rash action. Everything was perfectly worked out through years of discipline and self-control. Rachel was 38 years old and worked in the fashion world. She was the creative director of a famous New York clothing brand. She not only knew how to help women get everything in divorce, she was one of the best specialists in her field. Over the years of work, she has earned a reputation as a cold-blooded professional, capable of turning any case around in favor of her client. Her work required maximum concentration and emotional fortitude, but that is what made her strong. Her husband, Jason, was a successful businessman and owner of a chain of elite fitness clubs. He was 42 years old and had the looks that could grace the cover of any glossy magazine. Tall, fit, with a charming smile and the manners of a man accustomed to admiration. His work required a lot of time and effort, but he loved his job and always strived to expand the business. Jason's fitness clubs were popular with the rich and famous, and he himself willingly maintained the image of a successful and influential entrepreneur. He often appeared in magazines, gave interviews about the importance of a healthy lifestyle, and enjoyed taking part in social events. They lived in a luxurious home in one of the best areas of the city, drove expensive cars, attended social events, and their vacation looked like it was directed by a Hollywood producer. Every piece of furniture in their home was carefully selected. Every detail emphasized their status. Spacious rooms, panoramic windows overlooking the river, swimming pool, home theater. Their home was a dream for many. Every morning began with the usual ritual. Rachel looked through her to-do list, drank coffee, and went to work, where her day was planned out minute by minute. She was accustomed to the dynamic pace of life and knew how to cope with any challenges that arose in front of her. The fashion world required not only creativity, but also the ability to network, sense trends, and manage competitors. It was a world of strategy, and Rachel felt at home in it. Jason, on the other hand, started the day with a workout at one of his clubs, then went to business meetings, signed contracts, and worked on developing his business. Their schedules rarely coincided, but they always found time for each other, whether it was dinner at an expensive restaurant or going out to an event together. They looked like a model couple living an impeccable life. Rachel was a woman who was used to being in control, but even she sometimes had moments of doubt. Years of experience have taught her that even the most perfect outside can hide flaws on the inside. But she didn't ask any unnecessary questions, at least not yet. Rachel Montgomery was born and raised in Boston, in a family where external impeccability was an integral part of life. Her parents, William and Elizabeth Harrison, were people of strict rules and high standards. His father, a successful architect, designed luxury mansions, and his mother ran her own art gallery. Order, discipline, and refined taste reigned in their home, and any deviation from the ideal was perceived as something unacceptable. From an early age, Rachel was accustomed to the fact that her achievements mattered. She was raised to always be the best in school, in sports, in manners. Her every step was discussed and analyzed. Praise was rare, but criticism was a daily incentive for improvement. Her parents believed that only high standards can lead a person to success, and therefore they treated their daughter strictly, without unnecessary displays of tenderness. At school, she was an exemplary student, disciplined, ambitious, unwavering. She quickly learned that weakness was a luxury she could not afford. Instead of childish games and idleness, she immersed herself in books, studied art and fashion, and developed a sense of style and individuality. In high school, Rachel became interested in fashion design, took classes at the Boston Art Institute, and dreamed of one day creating something great. She found solace in art and aesthetics because it was the only space where she could express herself. But it was in her youth that she began to understand the value of a perfect picture. Behind the external brilliance of the Harrison family, coldness and emotional detachment were hidden. Their family dinners were more like diplomatic meetings where only achievements and plans for the future were discussed, but never emotions. Parental love was expressed in demands and instructions, but not in warmth. Her mother taught her that a woman should look perfect in any situation, that weakness is not forgiven, and her father instilled in her that the world belongs to those who know how to subjugate it. When it was time to choose a path, Rachel entered New York University to study design and marketing. Moving to New York was a liberating moment for her. For the first time, she felt like she could take control of her life. However, her habit of self-control, perfection, and the desire for success remained unchanged. She did not allow herself to relax, always working to become the best. She quickly proved that she was not just the daughter of influential parents, but a person capable of achieving success herself. Working at night and taking on any project, she managed to establish herself in the fashion industry. The first years in New York were difficult. The competition was fierce, and a young girl with no connections had to make her way to the top on her own. But she learned to use other people's weaknesses to her advantage, to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. Life has taught her that control is power and power is everything. She is used to getting her way, leaving no room for doubts and mistakes, and it was this philosophy that determined her entire future life. Success became her addiction, and impeccability became the only possible way to exist. Rachel was never particularly outgoing, but that all changed when she met Emily Carter, a girl who burst into her life with a bang and genuine laughter. They met at New York University, where they were both studying design and marketing. Emily was the complete opposite of Rachel, vivacious, spontaneous, carefree, and incredibly charismatic. She was not afraid to take risks, live life to the fullest, and enjoy every moment. It was Emily who became the person who showed Rachel the other side of life, the one in which there was no strict control, but where there was fun, freedom, and nights filled with the lights of the big city. Soon they became inseparable. Emily taught Rachel that life is not only about work and self-development, but also about pleasure. She opened the doors for her to the world of nightclubs, exclusive parties, and elite bars, where luxury and decadence reigned. For the first time in her life, Rachel felt what it was like to relax, let go of control, and just live. On Fridays, they went to the most fashionable clubs in New York, where Emily knew literally everyone. She knew how to negotiate with security, find the best DJs, and order cocktails that cost more than some people earned in a week. Rachel kept a low profile at first, watching the crazy world of partying from the sidelines, but she soon became hooked. At some point, she realized that she liked this new rhythm of life. She liked people who did not demand anything from her except a smile and a light laugh. However, despite the fun, Rachel couldn't completely shake off her personality. Even at parties, she remained observant, analyzing people and situations. She quickly realized that nightlife is not only about glamour and joy, but also about intrigue, deals, and manipulation. But instead of scaring her away, it made her stronger. She learned to use this knowledge, choose people who could be useful to her, and avoid those who posed a threat. Emily enjoyed the moment. She always said, "Rachel, life is short. Enjoy it while you can." They became each other's balance. Rachel helped Emily stay in line when she got too carried away, and Emily, in turn, showed Rachel that sometimes you just need to turn off your head and have fun. Their friendship became something more than just friends. They became family to each other. Over time, their adventures became more varied. They attended closed parties, met artists, musicians, and businessmen. Rachel was surprised to find that she was increasingly drawn to this world, not only for entertainment, but also for new opportunities. She learned to have conversations with influential people, notice little things, and understand the motives of others. Evenings filled with laughter and champagne gradually became something more a kind of school of life. Sometimes the night's adventures ended with morning coffee in small cafes, where they shared secrets, laughed, and made plans. Emily talked about her dreams to open her own bar, travel around the world, and find true love. Rachel realized more and more that she was attracted not only to the world of fashion, but also to the world of power. She wanted more, not just to work, but to manage. Thus began a new stage of Rachel's life full of lights, music, alcohol, and people who, perhaps, were not as simple as they seemed at first glance. She was no longer just following Emily, she was becoming the mistress of her new, shiny reality. Rachel has always been cautious in relationships. Growing up in a family where emotions were considered a weakness, she had long kept her feelings under control. But everything changed at age 19 when she met Daniel Hunter. He was 3 years older than her, a law student with confidence in his voice and endless charm. They met at one of the university events when Emily dragged her to a charity evening. Daniel immediately turned his attention to Rachel. Her restraint, intelligent eyes, and easy smile intrigued him. They talked all evening, discussing books, films, dreams, and career ambitions. Unlike the noisy partygoers who surrounded her lately, Daniel seemed grown up, mature, and confident. In his company, Rachel for the first time felt not just beautiful, but truly interesting. Their relationship developed gradually. Daniel didn't push her, but he always made it clear that he liked her. They walked around New York at night, drank wine on the roof of his house, laughed at stupid jokes, and shared their fears. For the first time, Rachel allowed herself to be weak, to allow someone to enter her world without a wall of protection. The first time happened at the end of spring. Daniel rented a small lake house for the weekend to take his mind off his exams. They spent the whole day swimming, sitting around the fire, and discussing life. As the sun began to set, he gently took her hand and looked into her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. Rachel nodded. For the first time in her life, she did not analyze the situation, did not make plans, but simply felt. That night, she learned what it was to be desired and loved. Everything was gentle, beautiful, with care and attention to her every movement. Daniel was patient, did not rush her, and she discovered a new world of sensations. This experience became an important stage of growing up for her. That night, she not only lost her virginity, but also realized that intimacy is not just a physical act, but a deep connection between two people. Although their relationship did not last long, they broke up a year later due to different life goals. Daniel remained forever in her memory as the person who showed her that love could be warm and sincere without manipulation and pressure. This experience changed a lot about Rachel. She was still strong and independent, but now she knew that somewhere deep inside her there was a place for love. She just wasn't ready for it yet. Happiness turned out to be fleeting. A few months after her first night with Daniel, Rachel discovered she was pregnant. This news hit her unexpectedly, mixing fear, excitement, and a vague feeling of joy. She looked at the test for a long time, not believing her eyes, and then, gathering her thoughts, she went to Daniel to tell him. He listened to her in silence, nervously fiddling with his shirt sleeve. His face became tense, and when he finally spoke, there was no joy in his voice. "We're too young for this, Rachel. We have our whole life ahead of us. Are you sure this is what you want?" She didn't know. It seemed to her that at that moment her world began to collapse. She tried to comprehend what was happening, but her body was already living a new life. For the first weeks, she tried not to think about her fears, holding on to the hope that they would cope together. She imagined holding a small child in her arms, feeling the warmth of his skin, listening to his breathing. But fate decreed otherwise. The pregnancy did not last long. Pain, weakness, blood, everything happened so quickly that she didn't even have time to understand what she was losing. At the hospital, the doctor calmly announced that a miscarriage had occurred, a cold word that means the end. The doctor's categorical, dry statement struck her consciousness like a lightning strike. Rachel couldn't believe that a few hours ago a small heart was still beating inside her, and now it had disappeared, leaving behind an emptiness. Rachel fell into a deep depression. She couldn't get out of bed, couldn't look at herself in the mirror. It seemed that everything had lost its meaning. Her body betrayed her, her life lost direction. The days merged into one endless gray blur. She refused to eat, had nightmares, woke up in a cold sweat, feeling a phantom pain in her stomach, reminding herself that it was all over. Daniel couldn't stand it. At first, he tried to be close, but his presence was cold, tense. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to help. Soon he began to find more and more reasons to leave. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to help you," he said for the last time, and he left. He disappeared as quickly as he had once appeared in her life, leaving behind only emptiness and disappointment. Only Emily remained. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to give empty consolations. I was just nearby. She brought me hot coffee, forced me to go outside, and distracted me with conversations. She said that life goes on, even if it seems impossible now. She pulled Rachel out from under the covers, forcing her to at least get some fresh air. "You are strong," she repeated over and over. "You'll get out of this. I'm here." Slowly, Rachel began to come out of her shell. One day, Emily brought her to their favorite cafe, sat her down at a table by the window, and silently handed her a mug of latte. At that moment, Rachel realized that despite the pain, the world had not stopped. People continued to live, the streets were noisy, the sun rose and set, and she had to continue too. This loss changed her forever. She learned to live with pain, accepting it as part of herself. She became stronger, tougher, more careful. No one and nothing could break her the way she did then. She realized that she can only rely on herself and on those few who remain close when the whole world turns away. And now she knew she would never allow herself to be weak again. Several months have passed since Rachel's life fell apart. The pain had dulled, but something had changed in her. She was no longer that trusting girl who dreamed of love and happiness. Now she saw the world as it really was tough, merciless, and requiring strength. She focused on her studies, devoting every hour to her career. Days were spent in libraries and classrooms, nights spent reading books and projects. She knew that the only way to control her destiny was to become the best she could be. Emily watched her friend and realized that something had changed. One evening, when they were sitting in a cafe, she decided to talk. "You're different, Rachel," Emily said, wrapping her hands around her cup of cappuccino. "You don't rest at all, you don't meet guys, you don't even smile the way you used to." Rachel looked up at her blue-gray eyes cold, almost distant. "I just realized that in this world, you can't allow yourself to be weak. The sooner you realize this, the less you will suffer." "But you are not made of iron," Emily objected. "You shouldn't shut yourself off from everything. Yes, you've been through something terrible, but that doesn't mean you should close your heart forever." Rachel grinned, took a sip of her coffee, and leaned back in her chair. "Heart? It's useless. People betray, feelings make us vulnerable. The only thing you can count on is yourself." Emily wanted to say something, but remained silent. She knew there was no point in arguing. The friend made her choice. Soon Rachel received an internship at one of the most prestigious companies in New York. This was her first real victory, the first step towards the success she so craved. On the day of signing the contract, Emily came to her house with a bottle of champagne. "You should celebrate," she exclaimed, waving the bottle. "This is your chance, Rachel. You deserve it." Rachel nodded, her lips curling into a slight smile, but her eyes remained just as cold. "Yes, I deserve it, because I don't allow myself to lose anymore." She raised her glass and took her first sip. This was not just a toast. This was her new principle of life. Rachel quickly learned that in a world of big ambition, no one plays by the rules. Her internship at one of New York's leading companies has turned into a battlefield where only the strongest survive. She wasn't going to be among the losers. Her main competitor, Mark Spencer, was smart, charismatic, and experienced. The management was looking closely at him, and he felt like a favorite. But Rachel already knew how to get him out of the way. One evening, when almost no one was left in the office, she went into the office of the manager, who trusted her more and more. Making an innocent expression on her face, she paused and said, "Have you heard that Mark is considering an offer from competitors? He has been meeting people from that company too often recently." The leader narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure? I wouldn't like to gossip, but the information is reliable. It would be a shame to invest in a person who is already planning to leave." She smiled softly. The next day, Mark was removed from the project and Rachel took his place. Emily, seeing how her friend had changed, tried to warn her. "Do you really want to go down this path?" she asked, watching Rachel carefully examine her reflection in the mirror. "Is there another one? In this world, either you control or you are controlled." "I won't allow anyone to boss me around anymore," she answered firmly. She began to use her influence and charm with even greater confidence. She charmed the right people, convinced, manipulated. One of her clients, a wealthy investor named Jonathan Lewis, couldn't take his eyes off her. "You know what you want, and it's attractive," he told her over dinner one day. Rachel bowed her head, letting the light of the lamp play on her skin. "I always get my way, Jonathan," she whispered. This was her first relationship without feelings. Only benefit, just calculation. She was no longer the girl who once believed in love. Now she knew that there was no room for weakness in this game. Rachel has never been a fan of the gym. She preferred jogging in the park or yoga in the silence of her apartment. But that day, Emily insisted. "You can't live forever in a world of business suits and expensive restaurants," she said, handing her a sports uniform. "Come on, a little adrenaline won't hurt you." Rachel rolled her eyes but walked away, and as it turned out, not in vain. The fitness club was spacious, with huge panoramic windows letting in the sunlight. The smell of sweat mixed with the aroma of the bar's signature smoothies. People around were working intently on their bodies, and the music set the rhythm of the movement. Rachel felt a little out of place among these perfectly toned, confident people. She is used to being among intellectuals where they compete with their minds, not with their physical strength. She was standing by the mirror, tying her hair in a ponytail, when someone brushed her shoulder. Her body swayed forward slightly, but she immediately straightened up and turned around sharply. A tall, athletic man stood in front of her. His blonde hair was slightly damp from his workout, and his blue eyes looked at her with a slight grin. There was a sense of confidence and inner strength in his movements. "Sorry, I didn't notice," he said, removing the towel from his neck. "First time here? Is it so obvious?" Rachel raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms over her chest. "You look like you're wondering why you came here in the first place," he chuckled, glancing over her figure. "Because a friend brought me," she admitted, shaking her head. "Apparently, I decided that it was time for me to change my surroundings." "Then you're lucky. This is one of the best clubs in the city." He leaned slightly towards her, as if revealing a secret. "I'm Jason," he extended his hand. She paused for a moment before answering. "Rachel." Their handshake was short but strong. She felt the warmth of his palm, his firm grip, his confidence. In his gaze, there was something more than simple politeness interest mixed with a slight challenge. This type of man was familiar to her, but there was something else about him, something inexplicably attractive. "Let me show you a couple of exercises so you don't feel like a beginner," he suggested. Rachel hesitated, but his smile, full of self-confidence, captivated her. "Why not?" she answered reservedly. They headed to the machines and Jason began showing her simple movements, explaining the technique. She listened to him, catching herself thinking that there was something exciting about this man. He moved easily, with natural grace, but there was a hidden strength in him. Every word he said was clear. He didn't just demonstrate movements, he controlled the situation, making sure that she involuntarily followed him. "You learn pretty quickly," he noted, watching her repeat the exercise. "I'm used to being successful at what I do," she retorted, looking at him. Jason grinned, as if her words only egged him on. "Let's see how persistent you are," he said, challenging her in his voice. After the workout, Rachel felt a little tired, but also strangely satisfied. It was nice to feel how her muscles were warmed up and her breathing became even. She was about to go to the locker room when Jason appeared next to her again. "Not bad for the first time," he said, wiping his neck with a towel. "You have good potential." "Potential for what?" Rachel chuckled slightly, raising an eyebrow. "To discipline, to control. I think you're one of those people who doesn't like to lose." She shrugged, neither confirming nor denying. He surprised her again with his insight. "Maybe we can have some coffee," he suggested, looking at her a little more closely. "There is a good place not far from here." Rachel thought for a moment. Usually she didn't agree so quickly, but for some reason this time she didn't want to say no. Why not? She answered neutrally. The cafe turned out to be small but cozy. Dark wood, soft lamplight, quiet jazz music in the background. Jason confidently took a table by the window, motioning for her to sit down. "What are you going to do?" he asked as the waitress approached them. "Black Americano, no sugar," Rachel answered. Jason nodded approvingly. "The same." When the waitress left, he leaned a little closer, resting his elbows on the table. "So tell me, what do you do, besides letting your friend drag you to the gym?" Rachel grinned as she took a sip of her water. "I work in the fashion industry. Design, marketing, branding," she replied. "And you, as I understand it, are the same person who owns this club." "One of them," he admitted without false modesty. "I have a network of fitness clubs. I'm building a business that helps people become better. This, is also a kind of art." "Art?" she repeated with a hint of skepticism. "Certainly. Managing people, understanding their motivation, making them come here again and again is not just about exercise machines and dumbbells. This is psychology." Rachel took another sip of her coffee, watching him closely. He spoke confidently, with a slight smile, but behind his words there was a depth that she could not help but notice. "Are you always so confident in yourself?" she asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. "Only when I know what I want," he answered, and a subtle hint was heard in his voice. She did not answer, but at that moment she felt that in front of her was a person who played by his own rules, and for some reason this did not repulse her. The conversation continued. They discussed careers, ambitions, and outlook on life. Jason talked about his path in business, about his first failures, about how he had to get up after falling. Rachel found herself thinking that his story had hooked her. Not because he was trying to impress, that's just the way he was. Purposeful, confident, knowing what he wants. "What about you? Do you see yourself in the fashion world in another 10 years? He asked, looking at her searchingly. She thought for a moment. "Maybe, or maybe I'll do something more. Influence, strategy. I want something more than just a pretty picture." Jason chuckled. "I thought so. You are not one of those who are satisfied with little." They drank coffee, but neither of them was in a hurry to leave. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they had known each other for much longer than a couple of hours. Jason didn't press, didn't rush, but created the feeling that something was already brewing between them. When they finally left the cafe, the evening air was cool. Jason looked at her. "Nice to meet you, Rachel. I hope this isn't the last time." She smiled, looking into his eyes. "We'll see, Jason. Let's see." She left feeling like there was more to the evening than just a cup of coffee. Rachel never thought she'd become a gym regular. After that first training session, she had no intention of returning, but something about this place hooked her. Or someone. She began to come more often, at first just to prove to herself that she could be disciplined, but she soon noticed that her thoughts were increasingly returning to Jason. He was there almost always, focused, confident, completely immersed in working on himself. She couldn't help but notice how he moved, how closely he followed the equipment, how easily he communicated with the club staff. Their meetings happened by chance. Either he passed by while she was warming up, nodding to her with a slight smile, or they bumped into each other at the counter with protein shakes. "Americano without sugar again," he teased once, picking up his drink. "Unlike you, I don't drink liquid chocolate," she retorted, looking at his cocoa and peanut butter shake. He grinned. "So you are one of those who prefers bitter. I am one of those who prefer natural taste." This light picking quickly turned into a familiar ritual. They didn't agree to meet, but they always crossed paths, as if this was how it should be. One day, when she was finishing her warm-up, he approached her with a proposal. "Do you want to try something new? Let's practice together." Rachel didn't answer right away. She was used to working alone, but something in his tone suggested that this was more than just training. "This is a challenge." "Why not?" she said with a slight challenge in her voice. Working out together became their new way of communicating. He showed her new exercises, corrected her technique, and she learned to trust her body and not control every step. Gradually, the gym ceased to be just a place for her to stay in shape. He became something more, a place where she could be herself. And every time she walked inside, her eyes involuntarily looked for Jason. Rachel didn't notice how the gym was no longer just a place to work out. Now he was something more, a space where she felt free, where her day began with short meetings with Jason, his light remarks, exchange of glances. But soon their communication was no longer limited to the gym. One evening, as she was about to leave, Jason stopped her with a slight wave of his hand. "Are you hungry?" he asked, tilting his head with a slight smile. "There's a great place nearby that serves good steak." Rachel hesitated. This was more than a random encounter in the gym. This could already be called a meeting. But to her surprise, she liked the idea. "Is it a good steak?" "Okay, you intrigue me," she grinned, tucking her hair behind her ear. Thus began their meetings outside the gym. First, rare dinners, then walks around the evening city, then random meetings, which, as it soon became obvious, were not random at all. Their relationship developed naturally, without pressure or haste. "How did you even get into this business?" Rachel asked one day over a glass of wine in a cozy restaurant. Jason thought for a moment, then chuckled. "I have always loved sports, but that's not the point. I like to see how people change, how they grow and become stronger. It's not just about muscles, it's about character. I love helping people find their strength." Rachel looked at him carefully. For the first time, she saw in him not just a confident man, but a person who really believed in what he was doing. "Do you really believe this?" she asked. "Isn't it obvious?" He looked her straight in the eyes. She nodded, but something trembled inside her. This man was not just a player accustomed to getting what he wanted. There was something real about him. Every day, Rachel realized more and more that Jason had become something more to her. She no longer just came to the gym to work out. She came there because she knew he would be there. She was used to their conversations, to the way he looked at her, to how easily and naturally he included himself in her life. And that's exactly how it all started. Their first night happened spontaneously, but at the same time it seemed inevitable. It was one of those evenings when tension hung in the air between them. They returned to his place after a late dinner, and as soon as the door closed behind them, Jason grabbed her by the waist, pinning her against the wall. "You're driving me crazy." His voice was hoarse, his hot breath burning her neck. Rachel didn't answer. She simply scratched her nails down his back, making him groan. His hands quickly slid under her dress, tearing it off her shoulders. She felt the hardness of his body, the strength with which he controlled the situation, and she liked it. He didn't just own her, he knew how to please her. When he entered her, she arched, leaning towards him. His size turned out to be exactly how she imagined it, impressive, making her moan with every movement. He took her hard, but with such precision that his every movement caused waves of pleasure in her. "You're mine," he whispered, pressing his lips to her neck. She answered him with a kiss that had everything: passion, thirst, complete dissolution in the moment. Their night was long, intense, and merciless, and when they finally lay down next to each other, breathing heavily, Rachel knew that after that everything changed. Rachel was not a woman who dreamed of marriage. White dresses, vows of eternal love, dancing to romantic music, all this seemed too artificial, too theatrical to her. She always valued freedom, independence, and control over her life. She was used to achieving everything herself, without relying on anyone, especially men. But Jason was not a man who followed general rules. They had dinner in a small restaurant with dim lights. The city was noisy outside the window, cars rushed past, and inside there was a cozy atmosphere filled with the aromas of expensive wine and spices. The conversation was about business, about new opportunities, about how both were used to getting their way. Their relationship has always been about struggle, about dominance, attraction, passion. They did not yield to each other, but sparkled, spurred on, and aroused even greater interest. Jason looked at her as if he was solving a new difficult problem. "You know that I won't let you go, right?" he suddenly said, carelessly spinning the glass in his hands. Rachel raised an eyebrow, smirking. Is this a threat or a promise? He grinned, leaning back in his chair, but there was a hint of obsession in his gaze. That's a fact. She took a sip of wine, holding his gaze. Jason has never been a man to hesitate. He acted confidently, always moving forward without looking back. He was just like her, used to taking what he wanted. Will you marry me? He asked suddenly, as if this was just another business contract, and not a question that could change their lives. Rachel didn't answer right away. She did not expect this, not here, not now, not in this tone. She expected him to say this someday, but she didn't think it would happen like this, without a prepared scene, without romantic speeches. It was too simple. But somehow that's what made the moment perfect. You're not the one who gets down on one knee, she grinned, placing her elbow on the table. Jason leaned closer, his voice lower, almost a whisper. I'm not asking. I want to. And you too. She shuddered, but not from fear, from the realization that he was right. She had known for a long time that this man had become a part of her life, even if she was not ready to admit it to herself. I won't become anyone's housewife, Jason, she finally said, crossing her arms over her chest. He smiled, his gaze flashed with some kind of predatory fire. And it's not necessary. I want you to be who you are, strong, untamed, mine. She raised her glass, touching the glass with her fingertips. Then maybe we can do it. He greeted her toast, their glasses clinking quietly. At that moment, they both knew this was a deal, not just an offer. A deal they both weren't going to lose. At that moment, Rachel thought for the first time, is it possible that in this game, where no one gives in, there could still be a place for love? Jason ran his thumb over her wrist, lingering slightly on her skin. She didn't pull her hand away. Yes, they were both strong, but that was what connected them. She had no doubt that this deal would change their lives forever. Rachel never dreamed of a big wedding. It seemed to her that such ceremonies were a waste of money and window dressing. But Jason saw it differently. He insisted on a luxurious celebration that would not just unite them, but would make a statement to the world. He wanted everyone to know that she was now his wife. Preparations proceeded rapidly. The best hotel, hundreds of guests, an exquisite menu, a designer dress from a famous couturier. Jason spared no expense in organizing the ceremony, which was to be the event of the year. For him, this was not just a union of two hearts, it was an act of power, proof that he was capable of getting the best. Rachel watched the proceedings with reserve, letting the organizers handle the details. She didn't interfere, not because she didn't care, but because she knew Jason enjoyed being in control. And deep down, she was pleased to realize that this day was so important for him. When the wedding day arrived, she looked at herself in the mirror. A long white dress with a deep slit, perfectly emphasizing her figure, easy styling, creating the effect of natural elegance. She looked luxurious, not a gentle bride, but a woman who takes a conscious step. Jason was waiting for her at the altar, in an immaculate black suit, with a slight smile on his lips. His eyes sparkled with confidence and pride. When she approached, he squeezed her hand tightly, not giving her a chance to doubt. "You're amazing," he whispered, leaning towards her ear. Rachel smiled. "I know." The ceremony went flawlessly. They exchanged vows, short but succinct, without excessive sentimentality, but with the energy that reflected their nature. Jason didn't talk about eternal love, he talked about partnership, about strength, about the fact that together they are capable of anything. He didn't make empty promises, he made a deal. When they said the cherished yes, he didn't just kiss her, he took possession of that moment. Jason's lips covered hers with firmness, with possessive pressure, causing the guests to freeze for a moment. This kiss was an assertion of power, a demonstration that they were now one. At the reception, he did not leave her side, keeping his hand on her waist, whispering something in her ear that made her smile. He saw her not just as a wife, but as an equal partner. The whole evening was like a celebration of two kings who had entered into an unbreakable alliance. They danced, moving in sync, as if they felt each other on an instinctive level. The guests watched in admiration, realizing that in front of them was not just a beautiful couple, but two people who had chosen each other consciously, without illusions or weakness. When they were alone in a luxurious hotel room filled with dim candlelight and the aromas of expensive whiskey, Jason leaned back in his chair, looking at her carefully. "Well, Mrs. Montgomery, are you satisfied?" His voice was low, velvety. Rachel moved closer, slowly lowering herself onto his lap. "Enough, but perhaps not completely yet," she whispered, catching his gaze. He chuckled, fisting her hair and pulling her closer. "Then let's fix this." He picked her up, throwing her easily over his shoulder, and then threw her onto the bed. Her breathing hitched, not from fear, but from anticipation. Jason covered her with his body, his hands slid over her hips, eagerly exploring every inch. Their wedding night was not about tenderness. It was about passion, about the attraction of two predators who finally got each other completely. His movements were harsh, domineering, but that was exactly what she wanted. He held her close to him, as if proving that now she belonged only to him. She responded in kind, digging her nails into his back, scratching, leaving marks. "You're mine," he growled, thrusting deeper into her. "Then show it to me," she whispered, arching towards him. And he showed. They didn't sleep all night. Every time she tried to catch her breath, he conquered her body again. Their union was sealed not by words, but by this crazy fusion in which there was no place for weakness. When dawn finally began to break through the curtains, Jason pulled her towards him, letting her lie against his chest. "Now you are mine forever," he said, running his fingers along her back. Rachel didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe for a moment that this moment could truly last forever. The honeymoon turned out to be exactly what it should be for a couple with endless possibilities. Jason rented a private villa on the Amalfi Coast, where warm waves caressed the snow-white cliffs, and the nights were filled with wine, laughter, and unbridled passion. Rachel enjoyed it. Their marriage began like a fairy tale: expensive gifts, romantic dinners under candlelight, trips on a yacht. They indulged in each other at night, their bodies merged in ecstasy, and during the day they enjoyed each other's company, as if no one and nothing existed around them. "Are you satisfied?" she asked him one day, lying in bed, when the sun was already beginning to color the sky in soft pink tones. Jason pulled her closer, running his fingers along the curve of her back. "Very. I got what I wanted." His voice was low, filled with satisfaction. Rachel smiled. Then she did not yet attach importance to how exactly he said it. Then she believed that these were just words. Returning to New York, they plunged into the rhythm of life together. Their days were filled with activities, each had their own ambitions, goals, projects. Jason continued to expand his network of fitness clubs, and Rachel moved forward in the fashion industry, occupying increasingly senior positions. Every evening they found time for each other, dining in expensive restaurants or indulging in passion in their luxurious home. In the eyes of others, they were an ideal couple, successful, beautiful, confident. Everyone was jealous of their union, not suspecting that barely noticeable cracks were already beginning to appear under this ideal picture. At first, it was unnoticeable. Jason never stopped her from doing anything, but his gaze became intense if her work meetings went late into the night. He began to ask more often who she was spending time with and what her plans were. Everything looked like concern, but sometimes there was a hint of demand in his voice. "You're late," he said one day when she returned from a business meeting. "There was an important dinner with partners," she answered calmly, taking off her coat. "You could have warned me." His tone was even, but there was something more in his eyes. Rachel just smiled and kissed him. "Do I have to report every time?" she whispered, sliding her hands over his chest. He chuckled, pulling her closer. "Of course not." His hands grabbed her waist, and a minute later he was kissing her so that any questions disappeared. But the next time she lingered again, his reaction became a little more acute. "Are you so interested in spending evenings with these people?" he asked, sitting down opposite her at the dinner table. "It's my job, Jason. You know I won't stop." She held his gaze. He didn't answer immediately. Then he just nodded, but something changed in his eyes. Rachel has achieved a lot. She became one of the leading figures in the fashion industry. Her name appeared in magazines, and she was invited to private events. At some point, she realized that her name began to sound even more often than the name of her husband. Jason was proud of her, or at least that's what he said. "You have become a real business shark," he once told her, watching her give an interview on television. "People like it when a woman knows how to take a punch." She heard admiration in his voice, but also something else, a slight chill. For the first time in her life, she wondered, does he like the fact that she is no longer just his wife, and the fact that now her name can sound louder than his? Years passed, and their marriage remained as ideal as others saw it. They were successful, beautiful, confident. People looked at them with admiration and envy. They had power, money, and limitless opportunities. They weren't thinking about children, not yet. They enjoyed each other, their lives, their desires. But the main thing that remained unchanged was sex. If at the beginning of their relationship the passion was wild, unbridled, filled with hunger and greed, then over the years it became even stronger. They knew each other better, knew every weakness, every point of pleasure, knew how to drive each other to madness. Their closeness did not weaken, on the contrary, it grew into something that was impossible to control. Every night, Jason took her as if he was proving that she belonged only to him. His hands were hard, his voice low and authoritative. "Get on your knees," his whisper in the darkness sounded like an order. Rachel smirked as she slowly lowered herself in front of him. "You're too confident," she whispered, feeling his fingers squeeze her chin. "You love it," he chuckled, running his fingers through her hair, forcing her to look up. "You love it when I tell you what to do. You love it when I tear you apart." She didn't answer. She just licked her lips, waiting for his next move. And he did it. Every night turned into a war. She scratched his back, leaving red stripes, and he held her by the hips, penetrating deeper, not allowing her to leave. "You're so tight," he groaned, clutching her hair in his fist. "Say that you are mine. Come on, harder." Instead of answering, she hissed, clinging to his shoulders. He laughed, turned her over on her stomach, pressing her face to the pillow, and entered her with such force that she moaned louder than she had intended. "Do you want the neighbors to hear me having sex with you?" His breath burned her ear. Rachel smiled, looking up. Let them envy. After each night, they fell asleep exhausted, their bodies intertwined, and in the morning he looked at her with the same hunger as on the first day of their meeting. Years passed, but Jason still looked at her as if she had won a prize, as if she were a woman who belonged only to him. And she still allowed him to think that way. For now. An ideal marriage does not collapse overnight. It all starts with little things, with subtle, almost imperceptible changes. Rachel was still in love with Jason. Their passion never waned, but something in their dynamic began to change. He became more demanding. If before he just craved her every night, now it turned into obligation. He wanted more often, harder. Appeared in his eyes something new, a gluttony she couldn't quite satisfy. "Are you tired again?" His voice was even, but there was a hint of irritation in it when she turned away from him in bed one day. Rachel sighed heavily, closing her eyes. "Jason, I've had a rough day. I just want to sleep." He was silent for a few seconds, and then ran his fingers along her thigh, squeezing the skin a little more tightly than usual. "I think we could try something new," he whispered, moving his lips to her ear. "You trust me, right?" She knew what he meant. In recent months, he has been hinting at experiments harder, dirtier, bolder. He wanted her obeyed and wanted to test its boundaries. "Isn't this enough for you?" she asked, opening her eyes and looking straight at him. Jason smiled, but there was something predatory in that smile. "I always want more." She knew it was true. He couldn't stand the restrictions neither in business, nor in life, nor in sex. He's used to it taking whatever he wanted, and she always went along with it because their dynamic turned her on. But now she felt pressure. One night he brought silk belts into the bedroom. They didn't discuss this beforehand. He just took them out and looked at her like, "Trial." Let's try it, he said, sliding the belt over her wrist. Rachel hesitated. It wasn't fear, no. She trusted Jason, knew he would never hurt her unless she wanted him to. But there's something inside of her that didn't respond to his new desire in the same way as before. Not today, she said softly, moving his hand away. He froze. There was a flash in his eyes of disappointment. You don't trust me. She sighed, sitting up on the bed. That's not the point. I don't want this to become a chore. I want it as much as you do. Jason looked at her searchingly. She could feel the emotions fighting inside him, and suddenly he chuckled, shaking his head. Okay, but you know that I don't like being rejected, he said, touching her face. It sounded too soft to be a threat, but too hard to be a joke. Since then, Jason began to behave a little differently. He didn't tell her what she should do, but his gaze became more intense, his expectations more explicit. If before he valued her independence, now he wanted her complete involvement in his desires. I want you to be only mine today, he said one day before dinner with her colleagues. Jason, I already promised that I would go. He sighed heavily, turning away briefly. It just seems to me that someone else is more important to you, not me. His voice was level, but it sounded reproach. Rachel felt irritation flare in her chest. But as soon as she spoke, he touched her waist and pulled her closer. Okay, go, he whispered into her neck. But at night, I will take mine. She smiled, kissing him back, but inside her something moved almost imperceptible anxiety. Sex remained bright, strong, but now it was saturated and demanding. Jason expected her to always respond to his passion the way he wanted. And if at some point she didn't burn with the same flame, he made her feel guilty. You're not the same as you used to be, he muttered one day after a particularly long night, when she tiredly rolled over onto her side. What? She asked, barely opening her eyes. You're holding back. You used to give me more. Rachel felt her stomach drop. Has she really changed? Or I just started seeing something I didn't notice before? She didn't answer. I just closed my eyes, hoping the feeling would go away. But anxiety had already sprouted inside her. Jason felt something was changing. If earlier Rachel was passionate, pliable, ready to dissolve in his desires, now she increasingly set boundaries. She could say no if she was tired, she could cancel dinner if work required her attention, she could leave for a meeting without telling him in advance. Previously, he knew that he had her full attention. Now no. You're getting colder, he said one day as they lay in bed after a long day. Rachel turned to him, stretching lazily, but inside she felt irritated. These conversations began to be repeated too often. I'm not colder, I'm just tired. You always have the strength to work, but not me. There was no anger in his voice, only studying interest, but she knew that this was a trick question. She took a deep breath, trying not to roll her eyes. Jason, you always knew who I was. I will never be that woman who gives up everything for a man. I'm not asking for that, he answered too quickly. She smiled, but there was a slight mockery in her gaze. They both knew that that's exactly what he wanted. Gradually, he began to demand more. At first, it was the little things. Can you cancel this meeting? Why do you have to go there without me? But then it became something more. I want you to spend more time with me, he said over dinner one day, crossing his arms over his chest. I already spend all my free time with you. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Or do you want me to quit my career? Jason took her hand, slowly stroking her fingers. You know that I will never demand this. But is work more important than us? She felt something tighten in her chest. This conversation was not about care, but about control. But he was too smart to say it directly. Work is part of me, just like business is a part of you. You won't give up your clubs for me, will you? He smiled, but his eyes appeared something cold. Of course not. She thought the conversation would end there, but soon pressure increased. Now he wanted to know who she was dating. He asked where she would have dinner. I didn't mind, but at the same time I remembered her every answer. This started to irritate her. She wasn't obligated to report, but every time she didn't tell him something in advance, He reminded him of it as if she was making a mistake. Previously, their intimacy was natural, based on mutual desire. Now Jason began to use her as a tool of power. He no longer asked if she wanted to. He's just expected. "You're mine today," he whispered, pulling off her clothes. Rachel felt something had changed. In his touch, there was not only desire, but also assertion of power. It was as if he was trying to regain control that he was beginning to lose. Sometimes she responded with passion. Sometimes I obeyed simply because I didn't want conflicts. Sometimes she even liked that he wanted her so much. But more and more often, she felt that it became his need, not their mutual desire. But one day, she pulled away. "Jason, not today." He froze. His hand was still on her thigh, his breath hot and demanding. "Why?" "I just don't want to." She expected him to try to persuade her, but he just looked into her eyes and slowly removed his hand. "I see," he said, turned to his side and lay on his back. Rachel felt an icy chill spread through her chest. It wasn't just a refusal to have sex. It was a sign that he took her no as an insult. She lay in the dark, listening to his even breathing, but could not sleep. She felt uncomfortable. It's a shame. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was next to him. 1. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed her temple before leaving for work, smiled, and said that he loved her. But something in his eyes has changed. Rachel tried to convince herself that it was just nothing, that this will pass. But later she will understand this was the starting point. This was the moment when Jason started looking for something that Rachel could no longer give him. Jason didn't think he would ever cheat on Rachel. They were always strong, passionate, ideal in the eyes of others. They were a couple that was looked upon with envy and admiration. But something has changed. She has changed. At first, it was just irritation. She became too independent, too independent. She no longer looked at him with admiration, no longer sought his approval in every little thing. She didn't obey. She began to say no, not only in bed, but also in small things. She no longer depended on him as much as before. Jason never tolerated loss of control. He couldn't let that happen. He wanted his wishes to remain her priority, but now that was no longer the case. It happened by accident. A regular work meeting, paperwork, signing contracts. Molly White, young, beautiful, soft-spoken, professional notary working with his business. She was not just a lawyer, she was submissive, respectful, admired, and he liked it. The first meeting went smoothly. Business conversations, professional courtesy. But when she looked up at him, there was something different about them. Frank admiration, almost awe. She looked at him as a man, not as an equal partner, like someone you want to obey, someone you want to please. "You are probably the most disciplined person I have ever worked with," she said, smiling shyly. "I heard about your reputation." He narrowed his eyes slightly, watching her. She spoke with delight, and it was nice. Rachel hadn't looked at him like that in a long time. In her eyes, for a long time, there was no admiration or admiration, only self-confidence equal to his own. "I hope you only heard good things," he chuckled, running his eyes over her figure. Molly laughed, lowering her eyes slightly. A woman who doesn't challenge. A woman who doesn't argue, doesn't question his decisions. She was what he was losing in Rachel. But for now, it was just a thought. Over the following weeks, he began to work late more often. Meetings with the notary became business as usual. Her voice was soft, her behavior impeccable. He felt how she hung on his every word, how she tried to please, and this is exciting. One day, while staying in the office, he noticed that they were alone. Late evening, dim light. Molly straightened her hair and smiled, leaning over the table, handing him the documents. Her fingers accidentally brushed against his arm. He didn't pull it away. Sorry, she was embarrassed, but there was no apology in her eyes. There was interest. Jason felt his insides flare up. Something dangerous. Wish, temptation, power. He saw how she looked at him and realized that she was ready to obey without question. He didn't do anything that evening. He's just allowed myself to feel. But from that moment on, he began to think about her more often than he should. Rachel didn't know what had changed, but felt it. Jason started coming home later. He no longer tried to control her, but in this there was something wrong. It was as if he no longer saw the point. It was as if his thoughts were occupied with something else. "You're late again," she remarked one day when he entered the bedroom late at night. "Yes, work," he answered indifferently, quickly unbuttoning the cuffs of his shirt. Previously, he would have come over, kissed her, pulled her closer. Now he just undressed and went to bed. She looked at his broad back and for the first time in a long time felt emptiness. Later, one day, she walked into his office and saw her Molly. Thick brown hair, a perfectly ironed shirt, too intent to look when she looked at Jason. He was calm and confident, but Rachel noticed how his fingers lingered a little longer on the folder that Molly was handing him. Rachel didn't say anything. For now. Jason knew it was inevitable. He felt it from the moment they first met, from the way Molly looked at him admiring, submissive, ready for anything. It wasn't just attraction, it was necessity, which was accumulating inside, demanding a way out. In recent weeks, he increasingly found himself thinking about her. About the way she smiles, the way she leans toward the table, the way her fingers touch the documents she hands him. Everything about her manner screamed submissiveness, the very submissiveness that he so lacked in Rachel. Today he was late at the office again, and she does too. "It's late," Molly said, running her fingers along the edge of the folder. "Looks like we're the only ones here." Jason looked up slowly. She stood nearby, wearing a perfectly fitting blouse that emphasized the curves of her body. He saw how she clasped her hands nervously, but not out of fear, out of anticipation. "You could have left," he noted, leaning on the table. "And you?" Her voice was a little quieter than usual, almost a challenge. He leaned closer. A second of silence, and she took the first step. Or is he? Everything happened too fast. Her lips found his, her breath mingled with his, and her fingers tremblingly reached for the buttons of his shirt. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but her hands didn't stop. "Then leave," he replied, kissing her with even greater greed. But she didn't leave. He tore off her blouse, his hands slid over her hot body, and his breathing became sharp and intermittent. Molly moaned as he squeezed her thigh, pulling her towards him. She wanted it. I wanted him. He pushed her towards the table, pressing her back against the cold surface. Her breathing hitched, and her fingers frantically clutched the fabric of his shirt. He looked into her eyes, and there was no fear, only hunger. "Are you sure?" His voice was low, hoarse. "Yes," she whispered, arching towards him. Her skirt was up in a second, her panties slid down, and his fingers found her hot and ready. He entered her abruptly, without warning, causing her to scream and grab the edge of the table. He knew it was wrong, but he didn't care. "Damn," he growled, starting to move. "You're so damn tight." "Jason." Her voice trembled with pleasure. He pounded deeper into her, his hands firmly holding her hips, not giving her a chance to pull away. It wasn't just sex, it was power, control, punishment for everything he didn't get from Rachel. "Tell me what you like." His lips were in her ear, his breath hot. "I like it." Her voice broke off in a moan. Louder, he squeezed her hair, forcing her to raise her head. "I like it," she screamed, arching harder. He chuckled as he felt her body tighten around him. The sex was rough, hard, almost wild. He fucked her right there on her desk, not caring about the consequences, not thinking about anything other than how her body was taking him. "You belong to me," he breathed, covering her lips with a greedy kiss. When it was all over, Molly was left lying on the table, breathing heavily, her chest heaving in a frantic rhythm. Jason buttoned his shirt, watching her with satisfaction. "It had to happen," she finally said, slowly getting up. He grinned, adjusting his belt. "Yes, it should have been. They didn't talk about the consequences. We didn't discuss what would happen next. Because at this moment, it doesn't matter." He left the office without even looking back. But for the first time in a long time, he felt absolute satisfaction. Jason didn't feel guilty. On the contrary, he felt euphoria. He knew he had crossed the line, but that didn't scare him. This is exciting. He was in the game again managed, again felt like that man who could not be controlled. Molly was never far from his mind. Memories of her body, the way she moaned his name, the way her nails scratched his back, made him clench his fists with anticipation. It was pure desire, and it burned him from the inside. And of course, it didn't end all at once. The following weeks turned into broken moments of passion, stolen between errands, meetings, and family responsibilities. He couldn't get enough of her. Every meeting with Molly turned into an explosion of desire, into a fusion of bodies filled with greed and demand. "You're crazy," she whispered one day when he dragged her into his office, pressing her against the wall. Perhaps his lips found her neck, his hands greedily squeezed her waist. "But you like it." She groaned, not trying to argue. She belonged to him completely, without reserve, without conditions. He felt her body absorb his power. She trembled under him in the darkness of the office, arched in the back seat of his car, lost her voice in the hotel room when he took it again and again. It was dirty, it was lascivious, it was perfect. They could do this several times a night. Molly could come to him during the working day without warning, knowing that he would find a few minutes for her. At such moments, Jason forgot everything. About my wife, about morality, about risks. There was only him and his property. But if for Jason it was control, for Molly it was becoming something more. She was waiting for his calls. She looked at the phone, wanting it to tell her to come again. "When will I see you again?" she asked one day, lying on her back in rumpled sheets. "Whenever I want," he answered, buttoning his shirt. She smiled, but her eyes turned gloomy for a moment. He saw that she was starting to get attached. "You don't think this is something serious, do you?" he asked, glancing over her naked body. "Of course not," Molly smiled hastily, but her fingers trembled as she reached for her clothes. Jason knew it was a lie. He saw how her look changed every time he got out of bed without looking back. He saw her invisible pain when he didn't leave her any promises. But did it really matter? He was at home the same as always. He was still involved in business, still devoted time to his wife. He hasn't changed. At least that's what he thought. But Rachel felt the difference, barely noticeable. Like a shadow, like a slight change in his touch. He was still passionate, but not so greedy, as if his hunger has already satisfied someone else. One evening, when he returned home, she looked at him carefully. "Did something happen?" she asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. "Of course not." Jason kissed her temple. "An ordinary day." She nodded, but there was a flash in her gaze doubt. Her intuition wasn't screaming yet, but it was already whispering something disturbing. But she hasn't thought about it yet. And Jason wasn't going to stop. Molly knew what she signed up for. She knew Jason had a wife. She knew that she would never be in her place. From the very beginning, it was his world, his rules. She didn't ask when he would come, didn't require promises. She was just waiting for him to come back once her. From the very beginning, it was his world, his rules. She didn't ask when he would come, didn't require promises. She was just waiting for him to come back. But at some point, the wait became painful. She found herself looking at her phone too often, which turns off the screen and immediately checks again to see if the message has arrived. She noticed how her heart skipped a beat every time he wrote one short word, "Come." But these messages came less and less often. At first, she didn't attach any importance to it, but then she began to feel fear. What if he leaves her? What if he had others? What if he just fed up with her? This thought became unbearable. "I only need you when you want me," she asked one day, lying next to him in the warm darkness of the hotel room. "Don't you like it the way it is?" His voice was lazy, satisfied. Molly bit her lip, turning away. To her, enough. It should have been enough. But for some reason now it's not enough. Everything used to be perfect. She was there for him at the outlet, game, and property. He ordered, she obeyed. But now he noticed a change. It appeared in her eyes too many questions. "You're not going to destroy what we have, are you?" he asked one day, straightening up in bed, when her hands reached out to his chest, but not with the usual greed, but with something else. I just want to know where this leads. Her voice was quiet, but there was a dangerous note. It doesn't lead anywhere, he answered sharply. She shuddered. There was tension in the room. I can't be just a toy, Jason. Her voice became firmer. I know who you are. I know that you have a wife. But I can't wait all the time for you to remember me. Her voice became firmer. I can't wait all the time for you to remember me. Then don't wait, he shrugged, getting out of bed. You knew what you were agreeing to. Molly watched him go into the shower and felt rage, resentment, pain. She really did. But now this was not enough. Rachel didn't know what exactly was the matter, but I felt something had changed. Jason was still there attentive, caring, equally passionate in bed, but at times his gaze went somewhere into the void. He became more often locked in the bathroom with your phone, staying longer at work. One night she woke up and saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen. Phone backlight illuminated his face, and there it was something alien, something she hadn't seen before. Are you awake? Her voice was sleepy, but attentive. Jason quickly turned off the screen. Work, he said shortly, lying back and pulling her towards him. Sleep. She closed her eyes, but her intuition didn't shut up. Rachel was not a stupid woman. She didn't like scenes for no reason, but one day I still couldn't restrain myself. You have become somehow different, she said at dinner, carefully studying his face. In what sense? Jason raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of wine. You stay late more often, you've become. She paused for a second, searching for words. Don't know. More detached. He smiled, but in his eyes, a shadow of irritation flashed. You're pushing yourself too hard, Rachel. I just have a lot to do. Maybe. She pretended to accept his answer, but somewhere deep inside something was breaking. Jason knew he couldn't hide his secret life forever. Molly was angry. Her patience was wearing thin. She didn't want to be second. She wanted more. And Rachel started suspecting. Late evening, his apartment in the city center. The smell of whiskey and her perfume hung in the air. Molly lay on her side, leaning on her elbow, her fingers lazily sliding over his chest. Jason smoked, looking out the window at the city lights. He was always like this after a conversation with his wife, silent, gloomy, tense. You're thinking about her again, Molly said, watching him carefully. I'm thinking about my freedom, he answered, exhaling smoke. She grinned and ran her nail over his skin. So finish all this. He raised an eyebrow, turning his head slightly towards her. It's not that simple. Divorce is not an option. She leaned closer, her lips almost touching his ear. Jason laughed, his hands sliding down her back. Divorce is a division of property, a scandal, lawyers. She won't just leave. This will be a war. Then make her go away forever, Molly whispered. His hand stopped. He turned his gaze to her face. There was no fear in the eyes, only cold calculation. You're a notary, right? His voice became lower, quieter. You can make sure that after her disappearance, everything goes to me. She nodded, the corners of her lips twitching into a thin smile. Even better, to you, or to me. He smiled back. He liked the way she thought. Late at night, at her office, Molly sat at the table, her fingers confidently typing on the keyboard. The screen glowed with a cold light, reflecting in her eyes. It's simple, she said without raising her head. We are making a new will. It is completely excluded. Everything goes to you. After you to me, if you want. I want to. Jason smiled predatorily, watching her. She pressed print, and the printer spat out papers that would change everything. He took the sheets of paper and ran his eyes over the lines. Designed perfectly. You're good at this, Molly. I'm good at a lot of things. She got up from the chair and sat on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. He took the pen and signed it without hesitation. In the morning, Rachel stood at the mirror, straightening her hair and smiling at her reflection. Tomorrow is Valentine's Day, their holiday. Dinner in an expensive restaurant, champagne, gifts she was looking forward to this evening. Jason promised to make it special. She was choosing a dress, wondering what outfit would drive him crazy. Red, black. He loved it when she looked luxurious. He always said, "You are my queen." She smiled. Everything was perfect, until her gaze accidentally fell on Jason's phone. The message that changed everything. Jason was in the shower and his phone was on the bedside table, the screen glowing. Her fingers were already reaching out to remove it a habit, but this time she froze. "Tomorrow everything will be decided, my love. She won't know anything. We'll be free by 9 p.m. Rachel blinked. I read it again. We will be free. The blood began to pound in my temples. The skin was covered with cold sweat. What are we talking about? Who is this? She heard the sound of the water stop, and, without thinking, she returned the phone to its place. His heart was beating so loudly that he thought Jason could hear it. "Coffee?" he asked as he walked out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist. "Yes." Her voice trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Certainly." She smiled. Exactly the same as always. He must not know that she saw this message. Investigation. When Jason left for the office, Rachel couldn't stay put any longer. Who is this woman? What was he up to? She started on his laptop. The password was the same. Mail, financial statements, documents. She was looking for anything. And I found it. New document. Will. Her hand shook as she opened the file. The eyes ran over the lines. And then she saw your name. Was. And now he wasn't there. In the event of his death, all property passed. Molly White. Rachel covered her mouth to keep herself from screaming. Notary. His mistress. She slammed her laptop shut and stood up. The room swam before my eyes. My head was spinning, my heart was thundering like a hammer. But this was not the end. There was an envelope on the table. Inside is a printout of the ticket. Rome, February 15th. 2 passengers. Jason Carlisle and Molly White. She reread these lines over and over again. Not alone. 2. Rachel felt her fingers grip the paper, crumpling it. My chest felt tight and my throat tightened. First there was fear, icy, bone-chilling. And then, awareness. She is being removed. He's going to get rid of her. He's going to throw away all the years they've been together. She slowly sat down on the edge of the bed, clasping her fingers together. It was spreading in my chest cold horror. This is not just cheating. This is a sentence. Images flashed before my eyes. His hands, his lips, their wedding, promises, laughter at dinner, touches at night, and all this lies. But the tears did not come. Instead, it was something else. Warm, dark, slowly growing inside. She stood up and went to the mirror. She looked at her reflection. There was no more pain in the eyes, only a solution. She's bigger than a deceived wife. She was a woman who knows, a woman who won't lose. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and grinned. And he doesn't even realize it. Late evening. The hotel room was twilight. The air was saturated with the aroma of expensive whiskey and her perfume. Molly was sitting on the bed, covered with a silk robe, her slender legs casually crossed, and a glass with the remains of wine in her hands. She watched Jason, who stood at the window, looking out at the night city, his profile tense, but his lips curled into a smug smile. A cold fire burned in his eyes, anticipation of tomorrow. "Tomorrow it will all be over," Molly whispered, stretching her arms above her head and stretching like a cat. "You will finally be free." Jason took a sip of his whiskey, savoring the taste, and nodded. "Yes, Rachel won't suspect anything. Everything will go smoothly. She thinks we will celebrate." Molly slid out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor softly. She approached him, hugging him from behind, her warm palms sliding over his chest. "Are you sure she won't guess?" Her voice was low, but there was anxiety in it. Jason chuckled and turned to face her, his fingers running along her chin, lifting her face so that their eyes met. "She trusts me. This is her weakness. She won't even think to check. She will just drink wine and enjoy the evening. And then it will all be over." Molly smiled, but doubt flashed in her eyes. She ran her fingers over his chest, as if testing his resolve. "Are we really going to leave?" she asked, looking into his eyes. "As soon as it's all over," he answered confidently. "We have the ticket. At 15 o'clock departure to Rome. New city, new life. Just the two of us." She ran her hands over his shoulders, pressing herself into him. "New city, new life," she whispered, slightly biting her lip. "Are you sure this is exactly what you want?" He grabbed her sharply by the waist, pressing her to him. "I want to get rid of her. She is no longer who she was before." His voice became firm and confident. "She was once perfect, passionate, submissive, adoring me unconditionally. And now she has become boring and predictable. She doesn't look at me with admiration, doesn't need me like she used to. I'm tired. I need something new. Freedom. You." Molly laughed, but there was something nervous in her laughter. She ran her fingers over his cheek, studying his face as if trying to capture this moment forever. "Have you always been this cold when making decisions?" she whispered. "Only when necessary." His voice was low, almost caressing. "Tomorrow everything will change." Molly wanted to answer, but Jason covered her lips with a greedy kiss, making her forget about everything. She gave in to him, her hands sliding along his back, pulling him closer. This man was her future. They had thought through so much, done so much for this moment. Tomorrow will be the beginning of their new life. But something inside her still smoldered, something like fear. Rachel opened her eyes on the morning of February 14th and smiled for the first time in a long time. Today was the day her husband was looking forward to. The day he thought he would leave her behind and start a new life with someone else. Only he didn't know that today would be the last day he would spend as a winner. She got out of bed slowly, enjoying the feeling of control. Everything should be perfect. There should not be a single hint, not a single unnecessary movement that would give him reason to suspect that something is wrong. She spent the morning at the salon getting her hair and makeup done. Then I looked into the boutique and chose a dress dark red, tight-fitting, low-cut. She knew that Jason loved her to look like this, luxurious, seductive, the perfect wife. Then the restaurant. They will order food, but there will be dinner tonight. She took care of every detail, his favorite steak, wine, candles. She stopped at the mirror and looked at her reflection. There was no fear in the eyes, only cold determination. Later, when Jason returns, he will see the woman who idolizes him. A woman who, in his opinion, knows nothing. He will relax, and then she will put an envelope in front of him. Rachel went into the office, where she prepared the documents in advance. The fake turned out perfect. Even if Jason tried to change something, he still would have no chance of challenging this will. She knew the mistakes he made when he cheated on him with Molly. She ran her fingers over the envelope, imagining the look on his face when he realized he had lost. This evening was to be his triumph, but now he will. Jason opened the door and inhaled the aroma of dinner. The air was filled with the smell of expensive wine, roasted meat, and Rachel's light perfume. He grinned. Everything was perfect. She didn't suspect anything. "Hello, love." Rachel came out of the kitchen, smiling, her dark red dress hugging her figure, emphasizing every curve. She came up, lightly touched his cheek, and kissed him on the lips. Jason kissed back, allowing himself a moment to savor the moment. It's the last night, and she doesn't even know it. "Is dinner ready?" he asked, looking around. Candles, a beautifully set table, a bottle of his favorite wine. She really tried. "Certainly. I decided that we should celebrate. Our love." Her voice was soft, her gaze warm. He nodded, taking off his jacket and loosening his tie. She was still trying to save this marriage. "It's a pity. I'll take a quick shower and we'll get started," he said, heading to the bathroom. Rachel looked after him, and then, making sure the door was closed, walked over to the table. She opened a bottle of wine, poured 2 glasses, and then, slowly, took out a clear powder from a small box cyanide. Colorless, tasteless, odorless, the perfect weapon. She carefully poured it into Jason's glass and took the glass in her hand, swirling it carefully, watching as the granules quickly dissolved into the thick red liquid. The poison will not take effect immediately. Slowly enough that he wouldn't suspect anything. Fast enough that he wouldn't have time to fix anything. She put the glass down, took a deep breath, and smiled. It's time to start dinner. Jason sat down at the table, stretching with a satisfied smile. The air was filled with the aroma of grilled steak, the faint smell of candles, and his favorite wine. The atmosphere was perfect. She didn't know anything. Rachel sank down opposite her, gracefully crossing her legs. Her dress was eye-catching, her skin glowed, her lips were painted a deep scarlet. She looked like I was really happy. You did your best, Jason noted, looking at the table setting, just the way I like it. Of course, my love, she smiled and lightly touched his hand. Today is a special evening. Jason nodded, took a sip of wine, and relaxed in his chair. I'm so glad that everything is fine with us, he spoke sincerely, enjoying the moment. You are the most amazing woman, Rachel. You know that I always want only the best for you. Her voice was soft, calm, almost affectionate. She reached out to her glass, picked it up, and tilted her head slightly. For us? Jason chuckled, picked up his glass, and clinked it with hers. For us. They took a sip each, and Rachel watched as his lips touched the glass, as he casually sipped the wine, not even thinking that this might be the last glass of his life. Have you thought about the future? She asked, twisting a piece of salad onto her fork. About what will happen next? Jason leaned back lazily, looking at her with a half-smile. Certainly. I imagine what the new stage of our life will be like. He will be wonderful. Rachel nodded, her gaze unwavering. I also think that tomorrow will be special, she said quietly. He looked at her, not understanding the hidden meaning in her words, and he simply smiled. Dinner continued. Jason ran his hand over his forehead. A strange feeling spread through his body, a slight dizziness, as if he had too much wine, although he only drank a couple of sips. He frowned, trying to focus on Rachel's face, but the image seemed to be shaking. Damn. He smiled lostly and shook his head. It seems like things went too fast. Rachel didn't answer right away. She slowly ran her fingers along the stem of the glass, watching him with a slight smile. Is something wrong, my love? There was a subtle mockery in her voice. Jason took a deep breath, but the air didn't seem to fill his lungs. My heart beat faster. He tried to stand up, but his legs reluctantly obeyed. What's happening? He looked at her in bewilderment, and then noticed how she smoothly leaned towards the desk drawer and took out an envelope. Oh dear, she laughed lightly, tilting her head to the side. I think it's time to show you something. She placed the envelope in front of him, tapping it with her fingernail. Jason looked from her face to the envelope, his breath hitching. Inside, suddenly something cold, alien, reminiscent of fear woke up. What is this? His voice broke. Rachel smiled wider, took a sip of wine, and answered softly. Open it and find out. With shaking hands, Jason tore the envelope and pulled out the papers. His gaze darted over the lines, trying to focus. What is this? Will? He frowned as he skimmed the text, but the further he read, the more ragged his breathing became. No. His heart skipped a beat. In the event of his death, all property passes to Rachel Carlyle. What the hell? His voice broke. The paper trembled in his hands. What does it mean? Rachel calmly took a sip of her wine, watching him with a small smile. It's very simple, my love. Her voice was soft, almost affectionate. Now everything belongs to me. Jason froze, then raised his head sharply. His eyes darted between her face and the document. How did you do it? He clenched the papers in his fist. This is impossible. I personally signed another will. Rachel grinned and tilted her head slightly. Oh dear. You know, in the world of finance, everything is so flexible, especially when you know where to make a small mistake and where to correct it. Is this fake? His voice trembled with anger, but his lips were already beginning to lose sensitivity, and a heaviness was growing in his chest. You couldn't. She shrugged, her smile widening. Oh, believe me, I could. And she did. Jason clenched the papers in his fist furiously, then tore them into pieces and threw them on the table. His eyes darted between the scraps and Rachel, and his heart was beating so loudly that it seemed to echo in his ears. You, you damn bitch, he growled, leaning his hands on the table. Do you think you can just cross me out? Do you think I'll leave it like this? Rachel took a sip of wine, idly watching his hysterics. Her eyes were shining with calm confidence. Oh dear, she said, leaning back in her chair. I think you just don't understand. You have no choice. Jason tried to get up, but everything shrank inside. My legs didn't obey me. A dull pain pierced my chest. He clutched his heart, breathing heavily. What? You. He took a convulsive breath of air, but the feeling in his chest was getting stronger and stronger. Pressure was building. Oh, Jason. Rachel stood up from the table, walked closer, and leaned towards him, her voice becoming almost affectionate. You understand that even if you die now, no one will ever prove that this is murder. She ran her finger along the rim of his glass. Stress, overload, business. Everything will be attributed to heart problems. You always loved good whiskey, expensive cigars. Who would be surprised that your heart simply couldn't stand it? You bitch, he croaked, grabbing the table. The world around me started to swim. Rachel leaned lower, her lips almost touching his ear. No, dear, I am your most successful miscalculation. Jason felt his legs completely give out and collapse to the floor. Rachel slowly walked towards him and leaned in, watching as his eyes glazed over and his breathing became ragged. She straightened up, picked up her glass, took a final sip of wine and grinned. A quiet groan escaped his lips, but his hands no longer obeyed. His consciousness slowly sank into darkness. His plan failed. His life collapsed. Rachel walked calmly around the room, blowing out the candles one by one. It seemed as if she slowly extinguished his very life. Then she went to the window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and looked out into the street. The city lived its own life. Couples in love walked, laughed, and enjoyed the evening. This day has always been about love, just not always happy. She returned to the table and looked at Jason's body, which had fallen heavily to the floor. Happy Valentine's Day, bastard, she grinned, raising her glass. You never learned how to give gifts, but today you yourself become the perfect surprise. I hope you remember him. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.